because that's the way people in power get away with everything. They have no conscience. Or they do, but they bury it under alcohol and drugs and their colleagues that they, hang around with. They sort of a mutual support system of criminals is what it is. So you have to puncture that, drill holes in it, cause trouble, make these people squirm. And if 500 alternative journalists were on the case every day doing this, there would be some serious squirming.
Hi, John. It's such a privilege to have you back on the channel again with me. Thank you for agreeing to come back.
Glad to be here. It's great to talk to you.
In our last interview, you mentioned a very important doctor, a lady called Dr. Barbara Starfield, and she mentioned that every year in America there are 225,000 deaths that are caused by the medical system. And this is a major medical crime. And you'd think that journalists would be up in arms over this, but why is this not the case?
Well, because it's too big. Barbara Starfield, she died about a year, I guess, after I interviewed her. She was a revered public health expert at Johns Hopkins School of Public Health. And her review, which was called "Is U.S. Health Really the Best in the World?" was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association on July 26, 2000. So this was a total mainstream production, you might say. I mean, everybody's credentials were meticulously mainstream and respected. And so she wrote 225,000 people a year in the US killed by the medical system, and millions more severely injured. 106,000 deaths from FDA-approved pharmaceuticals, and 119,000 from mistreatment or errors in hospitals. This is too big a crime to admit, because look who's culpable. You've got the FDA who approves the drugs. You've got the medical journals that are publishing studies claiming that all these drugs are safe and effective and proving to be wonderful, which is a rank fraud, obviously. And they know it, and I published statements about this. One from Marcia Engel, MD, who was the editor of the New England Journal for 2 decades. And in a published statement in the New York Times Review of Books, she said, after being the editor of the New England Journal for 2 decades, I reluctantly came to the conclusion that trusted clinical reports and guidelines and so forth were not to be trusted. I mean, this was her admission. Similar admission from Richard Horton, editor-in-chief of The Lancet, which may be the oldest continuous medical journal in the Western world. So just think about what happens if the powers that be admit this is the case. All hell would break loose. But yet here's a study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. So I interviewed Starfield. She said, the public communications people at Johns Hopkins tell me that you're the author of a book called AIDS Inc. Scandal of the Century, in which you say that HIV is not the cause of AIDS, 1988. And I said, that's right. I said, I'm willing to defend that position. I'm not just some crazy loon. She said, okay, can you educate me a little bit? I sent her Peter Duesberg's study, and she said, wow, this is hard to read and understand. That was her reaction to that. She said that no government agency had ever contacted her about her being a consultant to try to fix this problem. And she knew of no overall effort by the government of the US to remedy this incredible problem. 225,000 deaths a year, extrapolated to a decade, is 2.25 million killed by the medical system, like clockwork.
But why doesn't, so the media won't get into it because it's too big, because they'll lose their jobs?
Mainstream reporters, yes, they would be told by their editors, you either back off on this or, you're going to face trouble here. Meaning you'll either lose your job, you'll be blacklisted from the profession, or you'll be downgraded at the newspaper or the network so that you're covering minor stories that nobody cares about. That's that threat. But the so-called alternative press, I don't know what's going on. And rarely, if ever, do any of these alternative journalists pick up on it. They just don't. And I pressed them on this. What's wrong with you? Don't you see what this really means here? And my only explanation is either fear, they think this couldn't be true, and I'll be heavily criticized if I go with it, or they somehow still have a foot in mainstream medicine, a big foot somewhere, somehow. And they don't want to lose that, because once you accept this finding, your whole understanding and perception of modern medicine is going to be revolutionized. You're not going to stop there. You're going to keep digging. They don't want to do that because they're afraid that who knows what. Maybe they're taking a drug for arthritis and they're considering a hip replacement and they've got a doctor and they don't want to offend the doctor, or just they have a certain loyalty somewhere along the line to mainstream medicine that they feel they can't, get around. They don't want to disturb that. This is too much, too far.
I know it fascinates me too, because I often get people contacting me saying, I don't trust my GP anymore because they've been pushing the jab. But, who can I go and see? And my immediate feeling is, why do you need a doctor? Why do you need a GP? They're just going to hook you back into all the same problems that you're trying to get away from, from your other doctor.
Did you ever go to a GP?
I did. Yeah. But now, I never would take my kids there.
Right. Yeah, I know what you mean. One of the reasons of many that I don't go to a GP is because it's just so irritating. Because if the diagnosis is more than try to get a little more sleep or exercise or whatever, there's a strong probability that he's going to try to send me somewhere else to a specialist. Now I have to go through all that bullshit. I have to make another appointment. I have to go drive somewhere else to see some other guy who's going to now say, the first thing we have to do is run you through a battery of tests because I don't know what's going on. And then you're going to have to come back to find out what the test showed. And then we'll talk about what to do. Wow. Just that alone, even if I believed in what they were telling me, is so annoying. I want the first guy to say something, reasonable, whatever it is. Even if he says, here's a drug, I want you to take it. Okay, then I can look it up and say, forget it. And that it's not just necessarily one specialist either, because he might send me to somebody else. And now I'm dealing with 3 doctors, the GP plus 2 specialists. And the GP nurse might call me and say, well, we got your records from the other 2 guys and like to make an appointment for you to come in. Wow. You can see how people get so wound up in this that half their life is spent going to the doctor.
And like you say, I mean, people always say, go to the doctor. Well, if there's a high chance that they might maim or kill you, from Dr. Starfield's finding, I mean, it's just, this is what people, maybe it's just that it's too big for people to grasp the seriousness of her statement.
Yeah. And they don't see that there's anything, any alternative. Okay, well, if I'm not going to the doctor, then what? Because at least I know there's the doctor. But if I push him aside, you mean then I'm thrown back on my own resources? Oh, that's, too frightening. Every little twitch, little sensation, little pain, little odd thing, ache, whatever, is now grist for the mill of the doctors. Because, that could be a symptom of, which they have a label for. And now you're in that jungle. And people get into that. Because if you're habituated to this system, then you're oversensitized to what you feel.
It's an interesting, it's this idea of externalizing health, isn't it? Like that we humans are just constantly wanting someone else to, you're outsourcing your health. And I had a conversation recently with someone who was asking me about, she's pregnant, and she was asking me about the anti-D injections because she's a negative blood group and there may be complications. And she was asking me, what do I do and how do I get around this? Because I don't want to have an anti-D blood shot injection. And I said to her, look, I don't know about this. I'd have to do research, but why don't you become the expert in this? Rather than relying on someone else to tell you what to do, why don't you take it on yourself and go, okay, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to become an expert in this. And I think that's the answer with health, is that we can't outsource it. We have to figure these things out ourselves rather than relying on someone else.
Right. I can see you're lying in the street after you've been hit by a car. Okay, you're going to call an herbalist on your cell phone?
Yeah,
or are you going to let the ER team take you to the hospital, hope that, they got a good crew there, competent, that will put you back together at square one. Then you build up your health on your own. So crisis acute medicine, that's a whole thing over here. And what I realized a long time ago when I used to write about this, I said, this is like one of these shell games that con artists play with a little table on a street corner and they got a P and they say, okay, now which shell is the P under? And you get so the medical PR people will take their success with acute crisis emergency medicine and try to pretend that it applies across the board to the whole of the field of medicine. Oh, well, this is the same as that, and cardiac medicine, and kidney medicine, and cancer, and AIDS, and blah, 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 and all these germ causes. You see, it's all just like being knocked down by a car and transported to the hospital for emergency surgery. It's just the same thing. And people go, wow, okay. When you may as well have the emergency ward be in a completely different building, with a completely different name, a different staff, not connected to anything else. They do all their own work. They just bring in crash victims and people who had trees fall on their heads and all that. That's what they do. Let's not even call it medicine, okay? Let's just call it, I don't know, recovery. And that's what you get over there. It has nothing to do with, we found a virus here that is, causing your nose to bleed. And so we have to give you this drug. 20% of the people go into a coma when they take the drug, but I'm sure you'll be okay.
You wrote an article in 2020 titled "The War on Media Comes Home," which really struck a chord with me. And you said that the networks weren't looking to expose, they were looking to collude. Can you talk a bit about this?
This is a subject which, generally speaking, the public doesn't really want to know about, because it completely undermines the whole idea that these talking heads on television that are delivering the news have actually found out something, as opposed to passing along phrases, statements, announcements, say from government, which is one of their main sources of so-called information.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 That's what they're doing most of the time, is parroting their sources: corporate, foundation, government, medical bureaucrats, public health, doctors. We interviewed an epidemiologist at Georgetown University. So what? Who is that? Why did you pick him? I have another doctor I would like you to. No, we're not going to talk to him. Why not? He's a doctor. Well, this is an expert epidemiologist. What makes him an expert? What is epidemiology? It's tracking the origin of a disease. What has he ever tracked, actually? Back to a patient zero somewhere who caught a virus in Mongolia? If you start to think about these things, I've always thought of the media as, what can we do to convince people that we're authentic? That's the job. So the best actor gets the job. Walter Cronkite in America was maybe the best of all time in delivering the news, because he was avuncular, wise uncle, dad, the grandpa later on in his life. And there was never a clue. You never saw a seam that you could cut and say, wait a minute, I'm looking into, no. He was seamless. It was all real, all authentic, whatever he said. Now, he had to know over the many years that he was delivering the news that at best, he was giving you the facts on one level only of information. Sort of like you're in one of these lakes where you can just lie down and float on the surface like Great Salt Lake. He's giving you the best of the top layer, which is totally superficial, but he's making it sound like the only layer there is. There is no other thing to examine, investigate, look for. This is it. He had to know that at all times. And so he was a fantastically capable liar who could convince himself, really, that he wasn't lying. Because you can't be a good actor if in the back of your mind you're thinking to yourself all the time, I'm acting. The whole point of acting is to throw yourself completely into a role and you become the role. Then when you walk off stage, you go to your dressing room, you take off the makeup, you have a drink, you have a cup of coffee, you go out, meet friends, whatever, and you're out of it. This is the news. Even the writers, they develop a certain style. And I've imitated that style in many articles, satirical articles, in giving, ridiculous reports from the media. It has a certain flow. There are certain phrases you use. You don't use other phrases to indicate a certain thing. Speaking on the condition of anonymity, you want to use that phrase when you don't want to say, he wouldn't talk on the record. That disturbs the flow. You get used to a certain, and then the reader, those people who can read still, read the New York Times, and they imbibe all that. Well, this is acting too. Now, the reporters and their editors know that if they insult, demean, put a source in bad light, a source of theirs in bad light, they're no longer going to have access to that source. That rules the roost. If the New York Times writer decides that he's going to assault the CDC and say, this is an agency that buys and sells $3 to $4 billion of vaccines every year. They are also responsible for conducting safety studies on these very vaccines to determine whether they are safe and effective. Do you see a conflict of interest here? Do you see how anybody working for that agency is immediately committing fraud if they have a conscience at all? Now, the New York Times writer and his editor knows that if they even get close to that as the main point of an article, they're going to lose the CDC as a source of information for future articles. They can't do that. So they're compromised right away. I had a guy tell me he was either working for the LA Times or he knew somebody who was. So the LA Times stepped out of bounds, big newspaper, major national newspaper. And they wrote an article that was, demeaning in some way to Big Pharma. The next day, executives of one of the major pharmaceutical companies marched into the offices of the LA Times unannounced, into the office of an editor, and started reading him the Riot Act. Boom. And what would they be saying? Well, we're going to take our advertising money away from your paper. We're no longer going to be a source of information for you, and not just us, because we're connected to other pharmaceutical companies and other doctors. We have influence at medical journals because we pay big time for the ads that they run. We can cause major damage to you. So you better straighten up and fly right from now on. This is the kind of thing that people are not aware of. But rarely does that happen because in modern times, the editors and the reporters know exactly what the game is. They don't have to be whipped or even educated. They know where the boundaries are. They know what they can say and they can't say. They're completely trained like dogs. That's what's going on.
What do you feel is like a remedy, like an answer for this? Because, so alternative media?
Yes. But it has to be merciless alternative media. This is one of my big campaigns, is to say to alternative journalists, you have facts, real facts, damning facts, facts that expose horrendous crimes. You know they're true. You've got the goods. You've got the evidence. The point is now to use what you've got, to turn the screws, to attack using what you've got. Now, there are some journalists, and that's fine, who will just simply present the case story. And there are readers who like that. Oh, that's what we want. We just want to see. But by and large, the way to go is to be relentless, merciless, go on the attack. Don't defend, attack. Using what you've got. You've got the tools. So that's the answer. If there were 500 journalists out there every day doing that, let's say in the medical arena, without fear, without remorse, taking some of the hottest medical stories of the last, say, 25 years and pumping them up and giving them new life. Wow, who knows what would happen? Doing it on video, doing it on audio, doing it in print, every which way. I mean, I'll give you one example. I think this was March of 2020, I guess it would have to have been. New York Times, an op-ed piece, meaning an editorial. Two well-known medical writers and researchers. They write, the clinical trials of the COVID vaccine being conducted by the three biggies, including Pfizer and Moderna, are now underway. They are doomed to fail. The protocol is designed to find out whether the vaccine can prevent nothing more than mild illness, cough, chills, fever. That's it. Therefore, any statements about preventing hospitalization, severe illness, and death are off the table. Forget about it. Okay? And here's why what we're saying is true. And they spelled it out about, 600 words. I delved into that. I won't say how exactly because I want to protect my source, but I discovered exactly what the game was, how the design protocol was rigged, why it was rigged, why the companies wanted to rig it that way, and how rigging it that way, which ensured the failure of the vaccine, even by conventional standards, was exactly what they needed to get approval for the vaccine from the FDA. Making it fail was exactly what they needed to get approval. Sounds crazy, but it's the case. And basically, in a nutshell, they couldn't go any other way, because if they were waiting for people in the clinical trials to get a serious case of COVID, meaning life-threatening pneumonia, to decide whether the people who got the vaccine or the placebo shot were better off, they might be waiting for 10 years for anybody in the clinical trials to get a really serious case of COVID. They couldn't do that. Anyway, it's all there. Before they ever sought approval, they were dead in the water. That's a hell of a story. If you've got it and you understand it, okay, run with it. Not just once, 10 times. Approach it from 10 different angles to your audience and your readers. Hammer on it with a sledgehammer in different ways. Accuse the criminals of hiding what they know because they know and they're not telling anybody. You know, accuse the New York Times of never following up on that op-ed. How could they do that? You know, they had one of the biggest stories in all of COVID, and they just ran one thing on it and went on as if they never published it at all, which is what they always do.
Would the writers of that article been in big trouble for writing that? That one piece?
Well, alternative journalists presumably wouldn't. This is whom I'm talking to. You guys do this. You're the ones that I'm talking to, because I don't see that enough of you, and I'll probably make a few enemies by saying this, but who cares? I don't see that enough of you are merciless and relentless enough and using what you've got to the fullest degree possible, because when you've got the goods on somebody, do you just want to be polite about it or somewhat insistent and say, gee, the powers that be should really think about this because, they're making a serious mistake? No, you want to take those nuggets of truth that you have ferreted out and use them to the fullest degree possible, thinking through all the implications. That's another thing that I want to address to alternative journalists. Think through all the implications. If the FDA knows that the medical system in the United States is killing at a minimum 225,000 people a year and is doing nothing about it, what does that say about the FDA? What does that say about the humans who are working at the FDA and their view of human life? Because we could certainly draw some inferences about this, right? They know they're doing nothing. What does that mean? That's an implication. Press it home. What does it mean that the CDC knows this medical destruction is going on and is doing nothing about it? What does it mean that Johns Hopkins, where Dr. Starfield worked, never really backed her up and said, stop the presses, hold everything. We're suspending all medical school classes for 3 days and having Dr. Starfield address the students on the implications of her finding, which are not only troubling and disturbing, but absolutely mind-boggling. She is one of our own. We back her to the hilt. And we're inviting the press to come as well to medical school classes, because we're going to revolutionize the way we teach students medicine now, as we must. What else can we do? Wouldn't you think in a half-sane world that Johns Hopkins would take a clue and do something like that? Because Starfield's finding was so disruptive. It's as if the waters parted in the Red Sea. And then everybody said, interesting, and just stood there and looked at it, and then the waters closed and they turned around and walked away. So I'm trying to point this out to alternative journalists. The field is wide open. You have enough of these hot stories and truth about so many issues that are medical, as well as other issues, political and so on, that you can carve out an enormous territory if you think through all the implications, and if you turn the screws on the criminals and call them what they really are. Because that's the way people in power get away with everything. They have no conscience. Or they do, but they bury it under alcohol and drugs and their colleagues that they, hang around with. They sort of a mutual support system of criminals is what it is. So you have to puncture that, drill holes in it, cause trouble, make these people squirm. And if 500 alternative journalists were on the case every day doing this, there would be some serious squirming.
What are your thoughts too, John, about exposing people at the top? Because there's some difference in opinion of that doing that, because it's like a revolving door of these psychopaths. Some people argue that it doesn't make any difference about who these people are. It's about, you know, bringing a greater awakening to everyone to realize the matrix, as it were. What do you think about it?
You know, I've gone around the block on this a few thousand times. So I've thought about this a lot. And my conclusion is you do everything. You hit the people at the top who are in power now, who are criminals and ignoring the crimes and committing the crimes. You hit the people above them in the shadows. You know, you can pick your poison there, Bill Gates, World Economic Forum, the Rockefeller, as far as you want to go in those directions. You pick the public health authorities, Fauci and so forth, and you pick the politicians, wherever they may be, in New Zealand, Australia, Canada, US. You pick the doctors who are going along with all of this insanity and jabbing people with vaccines and studiously ignoring the horrendous death and injury rate. You go at all levels because you're working all the time. So it isn't like, well, I'm turning out one article every 4 months and I'm working on it, and I'm working on it more, and I'm working on it more. No, I don't believe that. There is no article that is difficult enough to warrant 4 months of work. I'm sorry. You're turning out new work often, every day. Okay.
Wow.
But anyway, that's what I do. Okay. I eat, sleep, and write because everything wakes up some people somewhat. Some people are more awakened when it's somebody that they know who is being pilloried and attacked. Other people are insisting, no, I want to know about the people in the shadows. That's all. That's the important. Okay, we got you covered too. I'm a sort of a
shotgun.
Yeah. Invite everybody to the party, as opposed to thinking it's either got to be this or that. Yeah, if you're writing one article every 4 months, or if you're reading an article every 4 months, but culture is very important. The down and dirty thinking and talking and blabbing and social media-ing and intimidation that goes on in the world now every day, where, people are canceled and censored and silenced or whatever. Jump into that pool too, because that's a bad place, where people who know the truth can be silenced because they say, well, I know that the vaccine is killing all kinds of people. People I know, people I don't know. But if I say that, then look what happened to me. So I'm just going to shut up from now on. And then now a writer comes along and says, hey, you who shut up, don't shut up. And here's why. Let me explain what's really going on here with these loons who are trying to censor and cancel everybody. And what will happen to all of us if we give in?
The collusion, like within the media itself, like where they're being told what to do by people up the chain, by advertisers, etc. It seems to me that it's gotten worse. I mean, you'd know more than I would, being in the journalistic.
Yeah. Well, it's gotten worse for sure. There used to be more, I won't say many, but there were journalists who were bent on exposing the truth that had some visibility. I won't say that they were writing every day for the New York Times necessarily, but they were writing, let's say, in magazines and they were serious investigators. So that's, gone away to a large extent. But there was always a huge amount of influence and collusion. I mean, CIA in America had assets in major newspapers and networks and still have. So you've got that. A recent breaking story, Alex Berenson, former New York Times reporter who now writes on Substack. Okay, so now he sued Twitter for banning him and settled the suit. It went forward, and as part of the settlement, we don't know what that was, they restored his account. Well, in the process, he came into possession of certain documents that strongly indicated that high officials in the Biden administration leaned hard on Twitter to ban him several months before they actually banned him. That's collusion in spades. And what was Berenson being banned for? Writing about the damage caused by the COVID vaccine. So now this is out in the open. Now this proves that Twitter can't say we're a private company and we can therefore censor anybody we want to, because the First Amendment in the United States does not apply to us. Because we're a private company, we can tell our anybody who does business with us or participates with us, okay, you can say this, but you can't say that. But now they're not just a private company anymore. They're a private-public partnership. They're colluding with the government. And now the First Amendment comes back into play. They're now more like a media outlet colluding with the government. But whatever you want to call them, they're no longer just, oh, we're just a pristine private company. And, if you want to talk about picnics in the park, that's okay. But if you want to talk about dogs, we don't like that. We're going to censor you. They can't say that anymore. Oh, this is major.
Yeah.
So if you had 100 serious, relentless alternative reporters picking up on this and running with it and, attacking Twitter and attacking the Biden administration every day, hey, who knows, what else is going to jump out of the bag? But I think it's always been there, that collusion, in a very serious way. But it used to be, this is just how we operate. In a straight-laced society where everybody was kind of conforming, the newspapers would get their information from certain trusted sources. They would say who the sources were, and the readers would go, just like a lot of them are still doing now, except with the internet, there's massive disruption to that whole kind of prosaic little process of going, It's not as easy to do that anymore. Like during the war, say the Second World War. Okay, well, you were getting all kinds of information from newspapers and radio in America. Where was that coming from? Well, it was coming from reporters, some of whom were out there with the soldiers. But, okay, they're reporting on grim details of battle, but the rest is coming from, the War Department, which used to exist in the government, information from the government that's given to. This is what you go with. Okay, thank you. It's what we go with, It's always been this way. Really has.
Yeah, because I have to say, John, it interested me in the beginning of 2020 when I started waking up for the first time. And I could see it happening real time where, do you remember that phrase of flattening the curve, that this is what we need to do? We need to lock down to flatten the curve. And I remember going to work and hearing people repeat this mindlessly. We need to flatten the curve. We need to flatten the curve. And because I don't watch the, normal media, I was sort of like, why are they saying this like all together, like in sync, you know, synchronicity. And you realize that this is the programming, this is the brainwashing that's going on from corporate media.
Yeah, exactly. And your experience, other people have definitely had the exact experience where you say, wait a minute, why am I listening to that? It doesn't make any sense, or I don't know if it's true. Who says so? You know? Now you know, in an ideal world, everybody would say that. Everybody would have that experience and they would act on it, as opposed to saying, well, yeah, that was an interesting moment, but I have to forget about that because I have to go to work. And, right? I remember back in college, had to be like 58, somewhere 57, 58, the Asian flu. I never heard of anything like this. I really never, maybe I heard of the flu in 1958, but I never paid any attention to it, the flu. But, you know, whatever, I don't know, you know. So I was at college and suddenly there was an announcement to everybody. Everybody should report to the infirmary to get vaccination against the flu. And I thought, what? You know, that was a good reaction. What are they talking about? Vaccination against the flu. And because I had sort of a negative attitude toward doctors, generally, from the time I was a little kid, I thought, I'm not going to the infirmary and get a vaccination. But floods of students began going there to get a vaccination. And I looked at all this and I thought, I'm not going to get sick. Are they crazy? I'm going to be fine. I got other things to think about, you know, so I stopped paying attention. But students went down to the infirmary and they got the shot. But also, there was a thing at college called, we used to call it taking a dive. If you had an exam coming up and you weren't really ready, you would go to the infirmary and say you were sick. So now the exam was postponed. Well, my read on this whole Hong Kong flu deal was, along with all the students going down there to get vaccinated, there were students that were going down there going, you know, I think I got chills and fever and whatever. They had exams coming up, right? They were taking a dive. So I looked at that and I thought, you know, this is just, it's a bunch of crap. I'm not going to pay any attention to this. So there's where, that's the awakening moment, which you either act on, you depart from the norm, or you just consider it sort of interesting, but it doesn't really affect your behavior in the future, which is a big mistake as far as I'm concerned.
Do you feel like you're always learning? Like there's always new things? Because I feel like since 2020, which is for me is kind of my awakening point, I feel like it's been this exponential increase, and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's this and there's this, and I'm learning new things, like breaking through, I hate that term, rabbit holes, but you know, going down different avenues that I never even realized before. Have you found that that's continued for you? Like, are you always having that, or do you feel like you've got a really good overview of most things now?
Both, I guess. I feel like I've got an overview, a good overview. I know that there are missing pieces, that it's not, I know everything worth knowing, you know. I meet people like that. I'm not happy with them because they've already, you know, if there's anything worth knowing, I already know it, you know. So I don't like that. Mm. But at the same time, there's always something new. There's always a new discovery, or there's a new absurdity that I can roll around and reveal in some way or another and say, do you see how insane this actually is? You know? he did this, and then they did that, and then he said this. I mean, you know, and are you buying it? And if you're not buying it, do you realize that you're looking at criminals who are lying, that are supposed to be, you know, telling some semblance of the truth, and they know they're lying and they don't care, or it could be a lot worse than just lying, killing people, they don't care, you know. So in that sense, there's always something new. Yeah, there's always something new. I do feel there are certain roads that I don't have the time to walk all the way down. That in a way, I wish I could. But if I did, then I would be taking time from everything else I'm doing. Like I hear something, you know, there was a guy named Meyer who, I don't know, 30, 40, however long ago it was, invented a way of building a car that ran on water. And he had a process of splitting the hydrogen and oxygen from water that was very cheap. Therefore, he could run the car on hydrogen. That was kind of the story. And that broke the barrier, which was, sure, we can run a car on hydrogen, but it just costs too much to split the hydrogen and the oxygen from the water. So it's not a cost-effective way to run a car. That's always what they say. And here, this guy was saying, no, that's not true. And a close friend of his said that he was poisoned and killed. And the friend also, and I quoted this whole story, one day, some, you know, high-ranking Arabs drove up to his house, and there were men in suits, and there were other people, and they were very interested in his car and his technology and whatever, and all these kind of things happened to him years and years and years ago. And the car apparently still exists somewhere. There's a story, it kind of goes, wow, I want to find out, you know, but that's like a year, you know. I got to get on a plane, or I got to drive to someplace else. I got to talk to people who don't remember or don't want to talk, and I got to find out who they know. So there's that. But aside from that, yeah, with me, it's a lot of it is, what's the piece of insanity that I can, that, yeah, that. And how can I show it to people so that they have to see it? If they read the piece, they can't look away and say, I don't know what he's talking about. They have to see it. Now it's up to them. People ask, well, what can I do? What are the solutions? What can we do? You've shown me this, you've shown me that. What can we do? What can we do? Okay. So for a long time, my conclusion has been, we have to decentralize power. That's the generalization, the big sign over the gate, decentralized power. Because there's too much power at the top. Whatever you believe the top is, the government or the, you know, World Economic Forum or the Illuminati, I don't care, whatever you say it is. There's too much of it, way too much at the top. You could go to any federal government of any country and you could say, whew, they got too much power at the top. I've recently been thinking more about this and seeing more about this. Because in the United States, we have this thing called the 10th Amendment to the Constitution, which is, there are certain powers specifically granted to the federal government. All other powers that are not enumerated for the federal government are reserved for the individual states and the people. That's the rule, which of course has been just completely overwhelmed, stepped on, trampled, destroyed. You know, as government has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger with more bureaus and people that work there for all their lives and all that, right? Okay, so the states have these powers, individual states. And I call them now competitive states. let's say we take this to another level, a state, whatever, Florida, Georgia, who knows where, whatever, North Dakota, suddenly says, we're going to institute health freedom. Here's the deal. Any practitioner of healing, whether you're licensed or not, we don't care. You can do your work in our state. And any client who wishes your service for any reason can have it. The only proviso is you can't be poisoning people or harming them, hurting them. You have to be a responsible adult, practitioner, client. You sign a contract with each other saying, this is what we're doing. We take full responsibility for any result that occurs. There will be no liability attached to any result, no lawsuits. We're not going to involve the government in any way. We are two responsible adults. You may not like what we're doing. We don't care. This is what we're doing. So the practitioner says, for example, I just pull this out of hat. I have a special kind of water and it can cure heart disease. And everybody goes, he's crazy, whatever. Fine. Another adult says, I think he's got something. I'm going to pay him X amount of money to give me that water, special water, I don't know, whatever, and see what happens to my heart condition. We signed a contract. No harm, no foul. That's it. People by the millions start screaming, and this is killing, murder, death. You're diverting this person from seeing a real cardiologist, taking the drugs, getting cut open and whatever. And the governor says, we don't care. Scream all you want. This is what we're doing. Okay, so what happens in, say, North Dakota? Overnight, you have 20,000 practitioners from all around the country moving to North Dakota, and clients by the thousands who want to avail themselves of that service from all these different practitioners, which they couldn't do because they were living in states that said, if you do this, we're going to put you in the electric chair, and kill you. So now all of a sudden, North Dakota's economy is booming greater than ever before. People with money are moving to North Dakota for this very reason. And they're spending their money in North Dakota businesses. And Florida says, governor says, we may not be ready quite to do what North Dakota is doing, but we stand with North Dakota. And out of nowhere, the governor of Texas says, boy, that's pretty adventurous what North Dakota is doing, but they're free to do it if they want to. And the federal government, how dare they call North Dakota a terrorist? Now things begin to open up. You've got competitive states, decentralization of power. You just decentralized medical power. Now, the other day, I'm watching Fox News, and there's a guy named Riley Moore, who is the state treasurer of the state of West Virginia in America. I know almost nothing about West Virginia, except it's a big coal producing state. And he's being interviewed, and he's talking about how the state of West Virginia is disinvesting from BlackRock, a giant investment fund. And they're disinvesting from banks. And I'm trying to figure out what he's talking about. And then it comes clear. The state of West Virginia has all kinds of money, like every government has, if they collect from taxes and whatever. Well, they have to put that money somewhere. So they put it in banks and they invest it with investment funds. But here's the thing, in America now, there are major banks and investment funds that refuse to do business with companies that are involved with fossil fuel. If you're a pipeline company or oil drilling company or whatever, and you go to that bank for a credit line or a loan, the bank will refuse to do business with you in collusion with the federal government, okay? So what Riley Moore, the state treasurer of West Virginia, is saying, all that enormous money we had in this bank and that bank, we're taking it out because they have that policy that we don't like.
Fantastic.
Holy shit. And these banks are going purple with panic. And Morgan Bank released a statement saying, this is incorrect. We never had this policy. We never said that we wouldn't do that. And then on Fox, the interviewer shows this to Riley Moore and he says, wrong, they have that policy and we're not doing business with them. Now, here's a bank he announces, I think it was US Bank. He said, we were ready to take our money out of there. And then they said, we'll change our policy about doing business with fossil fuel companies. Okay, good. We'll keep our money with you. Wow. Now we're talking.
Yeah.
Every state has this power. They have money. They put it somewhere. The federal government, which thinks they have all the power, wants to control banks so that we're forced, essentially, to shift to green energy overnight, which is impossible. I support alternative energy, but it's impossible to make that shift overnight. And they know it. And the reason that they want to force us to do that is because they don't really want to shift to green energy. They want to push the country into more horrendous poverty. So all of a sudden, here's decentralization of power. And Riley Moore says, yeah, I'm talking with 12 other state treasurers who are very interested in this innovation that we've discovered. There's more decentralization. There are about 3,000 counties in the US, and the county is like bigger as a political entity than a town, a village, or a city, and smaller than a state. It's kind of like a province in other countries. But in the US, there are 3,000 of these counties. Now, in the last election, Trump versus Biden, 2,500 of these counties voted for Trump and 500 voted for Biden. But, and this is official, this is not me saying vote fraud, this is official stats. But of course, because the population density of these 500 counties was much greater than 2,500, et cetera, Biden wins. But what it shows you, and forget Trump, forget Biden, I'm not talking about them. What it shows you about these 2,500 counties in America, which is a lot of land, by the way, if you look at a map, it's a lot of land, these 2,500, to try to control from the top. What this tells you about these 2,500 counties is that there are a lot of people in these counties that tend to stand for more freedom and power locally and less power federally. If you talk to them long enough, they would show you they would like more power at the local level too, because they know that big government is bad government beyond a certain size, and they know that long ago the federal government exceeded that size. They're not happy about that at all. Now, in America, the #1 law enforcement officer in every single county is called the sheriff. And in many, many, many counties, he's elected by the people, not appointed. What that means is, and this is controversial, but sheriffs are doing it, is the sheriff can decide to refuse to enforce a federal law in his county if he wants to. He can say, or even a state law. Like he said, like a sheriff will say, the governor just put another mask mandate on. I'm not going to enforce it in my county. I'll tell you that right now. I'm sick and tired of this, and so is everybody in this county. And you could think of all kinds of laws that the feds might want to hand down that a sheriff would stand up and say, not going to enforce it in my county. If you got 50 sheriffs who stood up on their hind legs with great publicity and declared, saying, this is the way my county works. I'm the #1 law enforcement officer. Here are 3, 4 federal laws I refuse to enforce. And here's why, because they're insane. And I will continue to do this kind of thing in the future. And if you had 50, 30 even sheriffs in America saying that kind of thing out loud with aplomb every day, Other sheriffs would be climbing on board. Other people would be getting the message. We're that far away from decentralizing federal power in America to the level of sheriffs of counties.
It's actually really exciting though, John, like, because you think, like you said with that example with West Virginia, it only really takes one, doesn't it? Where they can see what happens in one county and go, wow, they were really brave. And it comes down to people in some ways lobbying these sheriffs or these people that are, you know, of influence.
You never know what somebody is going to dream up as a solution to too much power at the top. For example, until I saw this interview on Fox with Riley Moore, the Treasury Secretary of West Virginia, it never occurred to me that the state government has all this money and they put it in banks and they can take it out and they can tell the banks, hey, you want our money? This is what we demand. Oh, you're not going to go along with it? Well, we're taking all this money away from you. How do you like that? It never occurred to me. Well, how many other ideas have never occurred to me or you or anybody else that these state officials or county officials can come up with? Number one. And number two, when people say to me now, what can I do? I say, well, do you live in West Virginia? If you do, just walk into the Treasury Secretary's office one day in the building and say to somebody, a secretary, an administrative clerk, whatever, I think what Riley Moore is doing is absolutely fantastic in this policy, and I want to help in any way that I can. Do you have any suggestions? Is there anything you need that I can help you with?
Yeah.
And if 50 people show up saying that, they're going to think of something. Maybe if one person shows up, they're going to think of something. Well, first of all, they only get complaints from people. Now you show up and you say, you're a friggin' genius and I want to help you. And they're, oh my God, you know, okay, don't go anywhere. Don't go anywhere. Let me have you talk to Jim. Jim, this guy wants to help. Can you believe it? Help what? Riley with the banking and the, oh, really? Yeah. Okay, well, sit down. Let's, you know, and pretty soon you've got an army of people in West Virginia doing something to really embed this policy. And three of these people who are really on the ball are getting educated in all the details and are saying, you know, I'm going to Montana tomorrow. I'm going to Idaho. I'm going to New Mexico because I've got friends there and we're going to get this, you know. Okay, so that's one thing you can do. The other thing you can do, everybody lives in a county. If you live in one of these 2,500 counties and you like your sheriff and you think he's doing a great job because he's refusing to enforce certain draconian laws, go to his office, say the same thing. I think Joe is fantastic. I want to help in some way, whatever. I'm not law enforcement, but surely we should publicize all the good things that Joe is doing. Is there anything you need? You know, there's millions of people that could do that in 2,500 counties in America.
Yeah.
You know, and so on and so forth. So there's no lack of what people can do. We're taking back power in smaller and smaller levels. And just to say one final thing, in America, there's a thing called local currency, meaning people invent their own money. Okay, and it's legal. And I know the guy who created the longest running modern local currency in America called Ithaca Hours. It's no longer in existence, but it was in existence for decades because he made it happen. And people took the money and they spent the money and they used the money locally around Ithaca, New York. And during the Great Depression of the 1930s, there was somewhere between 1,500 and 3,000 local currencies in America that were invented by people who lived in communities. And they looked around and they talk about current recession, inflation, that we're experiencing now. It's not what happened during the Great Depression. It hasn't nearly come to that, but there are parallels. So during the Great Depression, what happened in America, you get a community and the people, a small community of people would gather together and they would say, we hear there's a Great Depression. People are out of work everywhere. It's a horrible situation. There's soup kitchens and bread lines and people committing suicide, and Wall Street is going insane and the stock market and whatever. But right here where we live, we have the same people we had yesterday. We have the same resources, the same farms, the same farm animals, the same produce, the same building materials, the same people, the same families willing to work, the same children, the same spirit of community, the same school. Nothing has changed for us. And what they're calling and all that, what they're saying and everything. Now, do we want to go along with what they're saying? Or do we want to do what we've been doing and focus it on our community? So everybody says, well, the answer is obvious, right? So how do we do that? And somebody says, well, the answer is obvious. We invent our local currency, our local money, which we will issue. And we'll figure out together a system that we think is fair so that we spend our money. It's kind of a way of doing barter, really, but it has numbers attached called money that we invent. And all the money is going to circulate locally. We're not asking anybody in the big city somewhere to accept the money. It's all local. In 1,500 to 3,000 communities across America during the Depression, that's what people did. And they could do it now, anywhere. That's decentralizing power. So for some people, hey, you live in a community, you're a smart guy, you're some kind of fanatic data analyst who can put everything into systems and work it all out and whatever. Invent a local currency that takes in 50 families. See if you can make it work. Come on. If we had 1,000 local currencies right now in America, what are the Feds going to do? They're going to suddenly launch a land war with, thousands of troops across America saying, we're going to destroy these communities and their local currencies. You got sheriffs refusing to enforce federal laws. You got state governments holding out their money from banks colluding with big governments. You've got sheriffs, you've got local currencies, you've got people helping all these other people. And all of a sudden, the doom and gloom and it can't get any better and there's no way out. And, Bill Gates owns the world and there's nothing he can do. And Klaus Schwab is, Satan and we're all under his power. Those clouds begin to go away pretty quick.
Thank you so much again. You're fantastic to talk to. I always feel uplifted listening to you. So that people know where to find you, I know you've got your Substack.
Jon Rappoport at Substack.com or nomorefakenews.com, which is the website I've had since the year 2000. So you can go either one of those places. And I'm there all the time, turning out new stuff.
Well, I encourage people to come and have a look and and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Take care.
If you enjoyed this video, please visit supportdrsam.com